Welcome back. Today I'm going to be bringing you my first wide receiver ranking for the 2027 draft. So if you do enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing. It would be very much appreciated. Now let's jump into it. At 13, I've got Omarion Miller out of Arizona State, and I've got a UDFA evaluation on him. Omarion Miller is transferring to Arizona State this offseason after a 3-year Colorado career where his breakout 800-yard final season has plunged him towards the top of early 2027 draft boards. But to put it simply, I don't think he'll separate in the NFL. The speed is okay, but the change of direction is severely limited, which will lead him to becoming dependent on his 6'2" frame and strong hands in order to keep himself on a team. He also has impressive control over his speed, making him surprisingly effective after the catch, even if he lacks the high-end movement skills to make this a prime reason for him to remain on a team. So a couple of traits for him to lean on, but I'm not seeing anything that convinces me. At 12, I've got Ryan Wingo out of Texas. Ryan Wingo is a former 5-star recruit and has accumulated 1,200 receiving yards in his 2 seasons with Texas, but I'm not seeing a skill set that warrants his current position in early consensus big boards. His older brother, Ronnie Wingo, was a college running back and listed at 6'2", 214 pounds. Ryan exhibits a running back-like build. He also has the natural feel of a running back with the ball in his hands, as he weaves between tackles with patience, vision, and balance. As a receiver, Wingo does get the most out of his ability. He's running a pro-style route tree with Texas, and doing so with a tenacity and an understanding of how to vary his speed and sell his routes. But he lacks explosiveness and blatantly struggles to change direction efficiently. I don't think Wingo will create separation in the NFL, and I also don't think bringing the ball in through contact will be his forte either, despite the frame. His hands appear to be very unreliable, both by the eye test and by the numbers. In terms of how he could earn himself a roster spot in the NFL, I don't think he's dynamic enough to be a return guy or a gadget player, despite some of the running back traits, so he'll just need to get better at the things that he should be good at given his frame, bringing the ball in and blocking. But as he is now, I don't know what his role would be. At 11, I've got Mario Craver out of Texas A&M, and I have a Day 2/Day 3 evaluation on him. Listed at 5'9", 165 pounds, Mario Craver will face limitations at the next level. And further to this point, it doesn't strike me as blazing speed either, probably mid to high 4.4s if I had to guess. However, Texas A&M do a good job demonstrating how he could be used in the NFL. They use motion to give him free releases where possible, and Craver displays excellent body control and fluidity in order to pick up on pockets of space and carve into the defense. From there, he displays impressive balance and has recorded more yards after the catch than before it. The catching technique seems a bit funky to me, but I'm not too concerned in the role he'll likely play, where it's a lot of underneath stuff. In fact, he seems at first glance as someone who could provide return value, but I don't think he's fast enough. So it's all a bit iffy, but there are roles for these types of players in today's NFL. Offenses are willing to use motion in order to give a guy like this the free release he needs, and I could see him becoming reliable out of the slot as a guy who slips through the cracks of defenses who are focusing their attention elsewhere. At 10, I've got Wyatt Young out of Oregon State, and I've got a Day 2 evaluation on him. Wyatt Young will be following his North Texas quarterback head coach duo in Drew Mestermaker and Derek Morris to Oregon State after the best year in North Texas history. And Young did more than play his part in this, as he finished the year 3rd in college football with 1,264 receiving yards. After feeling underwhelmed by his teammate Drew Mestermaker during my quarterback evaluations, I was pleasantly surprised to see that Young's position in early draft boards is far more warranted. Listed at 6 foot and a shade under 200 pounds, Young brings a thick build to the slot where he's played almost exclusively. He also brings a vast set of skills that should make his eventual NFL transition fairly seamless. He definitely lacks long speed, but catches defenders off guard with a little bit of burst as he shows excellent control over his speed and a vet-like understanding of how to vary it in order to maximize his separation. Young runs a pretty basic route tree, but the release is very efficient. He's got a great feel for where to sit down versus zone, and he flaunts impressive flexibility in order to run a set of sharp and purposeful routes. I did see a couple of concentration drops, but I think generally speaking, he's reliable bringing the ball in. He shows a toughness through contact and can make a defender or two miss with the ball in his hands. All of these things combined should lead to a dependable slot receiver at the next level. I don't have too many criticisms, but he also doesn't do anything to jump off the screen. The average height and limited long speed is why I think he will continue to operate out of the slot in his career, and although the route running is really good, it's not elusive in the same way as the premier slot receivers in the league. So I think the label of you know what you're going to get is appropriate for Young, both in terms of the positive and the negative connotations. At 9, I've got Deuce Robinson out of Florida State. After a quiet 2-year career with USC, former 5-star recruit Deuce Robinson transferred to Florida State last offseason and had a huge breakout, recording over 1,000 receiving yards. Florida State love big receivers, and listed at 6'6", 230 pounds, Robinson's game revolves around the significant mismatch quality he brings to every game with his size alone, and he is surprisingly dynamic. Of course, he doesn't possess blazing speed. He does often round out his routes or take a few extra steps on stop routes in particular, but he's got a really vast, efficient release package, and he thrives when it comes to slant routes. Robinson has absolutely mastered the timing of the slant route, and he's just got that little bit of juice to create separation, and his frame makes it seemingly impossible at times for the defender to do anything about it. My main concern about his game right now is that I don't think he makes the most of his size with the way he catches the ball. And I'm not saying he's disastrous bringing the ball in by any means, but he kind of catches it with T-Rex arms, which negates his leverage. He's making the ball more contested than it needs to be, because if he was to really extend out and attack the ball rather than almost body catching it a lot of the time, the defender wouldn't be able to get close. And this might just be a coaching thing that he could learn, or maybe he just doesn't have that much trust in his hands. I've seen him bobble a few receptions, and he just doesn't look quite as natural as I would hope bringing the ball in for a guy with his skill set. With this in mind, I don't think the route running is as gifted as a Mike Evans or a Cortland Sutton, but if he can lean into his skill set a little more and really get the most out of his natural advantage, I think he has the potential of a solid wide receiver too. At 8, and already moving into my first round evaluations. So, spoiler alert, this is a talented group. Charlie Becker, out of Indiana. After entering last season with a tweak to his hamstring, Becker was forced into taking a back seat to Omar Cooper Jr. and Elijah Surratt last season, but simultaneously, he got healthier, the big games started coming, and he ended up being Indiana's leading receiver during the playoffs. That said, the exact same injury Becker faced last year returned in spring practice this year, meaning this is now a recurring hamstring issue that may well be a defining point next April when the time comes for a team to split hairs and make a decision. But he's 6'4" with good speed for his size. I would think he runs in the low 4.4s if I had to guess. And similar to Elijah Surratt in this offense last year, although the route tree is simple, it's clear that the foundations of a finely tuned route runner is there. I will say that the ability to control his body, control his speed, and sink his hips to make space underneath, that's not really his game. But his release is really efficient, and he is a fluid route runner. It's just more linear elasticity than short region silkiness. Nevertheless, he's big, he's got speed, he can separate vertically. I think he'll thrive in the intermediate to deep region. For what it's worth, he's a very good blocker. And if you need one more huge positive to get over the injury stuff, Becker might have the best hands in this draft. Last year, he caught 13 of his 17 contested catch targets and didn't have a single drop to his name. A vital part of pretty much every big receiver in the league's game is the hands. The quarterback having the option of throwing where only their receiver can get it is what gives these bigger guys the edge. There are a handful of number 1 or high-end number 2 receivers who don't separate as much as I think Becker could, but they have the ability to bring the ball in away from their body consistently. Becker tracks the ball remarkably well and has the separation skills to make this more of a bonus than a requirement in his game. So health is the question mark, because his performance on the field is one of someone who could be a wide receiver 1 for an NFL team. At 7, I've got KJ Duff out of Rutgers. At 6'6", KJ Duff is another one of these absolute giants at the receiver position. The average height for a tight end in today's NFL is 6'4", but his 225 pounds leaves him with a lean enough frame to thrive as a receiver. And where Deuce Robinson, who we just spoke about, fit the prototype and would be easy to label as the next T. Higgins, Mike Evans, Michael Pittman Jr. or Courtland Sutton, he just didn't quite have what they have. KJ Duff has it. Having tied first for contested catches in college football last season, Duff is the dominant presence you expect him to be. And it's hard enough getting accurate height and weight measurements for college football, never mind hand size. But I think it's safe to assume he has an enormous pair of hands, because the way he is able to throw his hands out at the ball and latch onto it is exactly what you're hoping to see from this type of player. But what's even more exciting to me about KJ Duff is the way he moves. Of course, you're not expecting him to move like a 5'10" receiver. He doesn't have to, but he's been running a pro-style route tree with Rutgers and has consistently demonstrated the burst, craftiness, and the flexibility in his hips and his ankles to keep defenders a step behind and continuously find enough space to be highly productive when the quarterback puts it where only he can get it. Duff has the look of a big man who isn't just dominating college football in a man against boys type of way, but carries the expansive skill set of a successful outside receiver at the next level. At 6, I've got Nick Marsh out of Indiana. Nick Marsh is yet to reach 700 yards in a single season after a 2-year career with Michigan State, where he's dealt with niggling injuries in both years. But after transferring to Indiana this offseason, I expect him to not only replace Elijah Surratt on the outside, but be a slight upgrade in quality. Marsh has boundary receiver size at 6'3", but lacks the long speed to be much of a downfield threat. His personal best 11.37 100-meter sprint in high school was slightly slower than the likes of Puka Nacua and Keenan Allen, who I think are good comparisons for his speed on the field. What Marsh is, though, is a phenomenal route runner. He ran a full route tree with Michigan State and displayed really impressive body control, attention to detail, and agility. Marsh uses his size as a blocker, where he excels for the position, deploying impressive technique and effort. He also uses his size on occasion to create separation with a push-off, although he is fairly reserved with the physicality, generally opting to win with his elite footwork alone. His drop rate was a little bit high at 9.4% last season, but the ones I saw were in part due to poor quarterback play and certainly weren't inexcusable drops. His technique is fine, generally looks to extend out and catch with his hands, although he does bring his body into play when it makes sense to do so, which I'm not against, and he seems natural in adjusting to the ball, so I'm not worried about that. But in summary, the lack of speed somewhat caps his ceiling, as he's rarely going to find himself in acres of space, but he's someone who I think will find half a yard time and time again, and prove to be a go-to option on the outside, with the shiftiness and physicality to add some yards after the catch as well, despite a lack of speed. At 5, I've got Jeremiah Smith out of Ohio State. As a former 5-star recruit and playing for Ohio State, as well as exhibiting prototypical size, Jeremiah Smith was bound to get major hype. As you can probably tell by his position in the ranking, I'm not going to tell you he's generational, but I do like him a lot. At 6'3" and notably 223 pounds, Smith is a true outside receiver. But my first question when I turned on the film is, can this guy really separate consistently enough to be an elite wide receiver at the next level? Because he surprised me with the long speed. Once he gets moving, Smith can stretch the field, and this combined with his contested catch ability could make him a genuine deep threat in the NFL. But this is build-up speed. I don't think it's explosive enough for NFL corners to just sit off him and give him the space underneath all the time because they're scared of him going past them. And as is often the case with these bigger receivers, he doesn't excel when it comes to short area quickness and agility. But the more I watched his film, the more I was able to build a picture of how he could succeed in the NFL. Although Smith lacks the ability to stop on a dime with ease or make exaggerated cuts with no wasted movement, he does have excellent body control for his size, which combined with the pro-style Ohio State coaching has resulted in a highly nuanced and detailed route runner. The crisp, crafty release package, the subtle shakes within the route to make the defender hesitate, a very well-executed push-off backed by his physicality. These are all things that allow him to find a yard of space versus tight coverage, and a yard of space is all he needs. Smith has long arms and big hands that allow him to extend out and catch the ball away from his body very consistently, and that's how I think he'll win. I feel that there will be plenty of cornerbacks who can run with Smith and feel like they're always on top of him, but if he lands with a quarterback who he has chemistry with, understands the timing, and puts it where only Smith can get it, as he's finding that inch of space that I spoke about, he could be very productive. So in summary, I'm not seeing the limitless prospect he's being made out to be, who walks onto any team and dominates, but in the right situation, he's a solid wide receiver 1. At 4, I've got Brian Wesco Jr. out of Clemson. Bryant Wesco was maybe the hardest player in this video to rank, because if it wasn't for the injury, he would be my number 1. It's some of the best route running I've ever seen. It's an intricate, diverse route tree that he runs with great attention to detail, and then the ability to sink his hips or spring laterally, incredible. He is so elusive. So now if I tell you that he's got what a lot of the receivers in this ranking don't, which is genuine explosiveness, hopefully it's clear why I feel the upside for this guy is through the roof. In terms of the ability to get open, Wesco is a rare commodity. The explosiveness forces defenders to back off, but pairing that up with the amount of control and route running polish he displays is something that I'm honestly not sure I've seen from a prospect in the last few years. I wish I could end the evaluation there, but unfortunately I can't, because his season was cut short when on a punt return in week 8, he was flipped on his head, leading to a spinal contusion. I'm not a doctor, but anything spinal for an athlete whose game is based around changing direction, it can't be a good thing. Now, back injuries for a receiver are generally one-off freak incidents like this one, so reoccurrence isn't a huge concern of mine, and he has been cleared to return. But whether he'll return with the same snap to his route running is a genuine question, and the negatives don't end there. At 6'2", 190 pounds, his frame is a bit on the skinny side, so working through physical defense can be a little bit of a struggle. That's if the defender can get their hands on him, but it also raises the chance of more injury issues popping up. I also don't think Wesco is a natural bringing the ball in. His 13.2% drop rate is far higher than you would like, and the eye test unfortunately backs this up, as even his completions aren't entirely convincing. The technique usually involves him trying to scoop the ball into his body, which can lead to some really disappointing drops in open space, but it also can allow the ball to pop out under any contact. So, in a way, it's quite simple. If he returns from the injury with the same fluidity as I've seen on his film so far, I'll be willing to overlook the occasional frustrating drop and the skinny frame, because he'll be open so often that those things won't actually matter a great deal, and he's going to likely be my number 1 receiver. If, however, there's even a slight drop-off in explosiveness and elusiveness, he's probably going to drop down this ranking quite considerably, because he'll probably be a good route runner, but maybe not a special one anymore, so he won't have that standout quality, but he's also not going to be creating as much separation, meaning the skinny frame and the awkward hands are going to become a bigger issue, as he'll be working through more contact than he's had to before, where he's just always finding himself in space. At 3, I've got teammate of Brian Wesco Jr., TJ Moore, out of Clemson. TJ Moore is a former 5-star recruit and led a talented Clemson receiving corps last season in production. Moore is listed at 6'3", 205 pounds, and displays some of the best route running in this class. He is not only asked to run a pro-style route tree, but a versatile one targeting every region of the field, which has allowed him to demonstrate his extensive attention to detail and capability. Every route he runs contains a handful of noticeable separation checkpoints, meaning when most college receivers run a route, it's all about the break. They run forward, they're covered, and then they break, and the break is where they gain separation or they don't. Moore's routes are all about establishing leverage from the moment the ball is snapped. There's the initial footwork from the release if he's in press man coverage. He'll then often throw his arms over from one side of the defender to the other, a bit like the Euro step in basketball. A bit of contact is something he uses as more of a last resort, but when he does use it, it's incredibly well timed and executed. His body language is excellent, he sells the routes incredibly well, but the point being that within the basic concept of whatever route he's running, there's a multitude of concise and calculated moves that mean he's got the edge on his defender before the break. It should be said though that yes, he is very well coached, but you can't run routes in this way if you don't have the ability to manipulate your own movement to an elite level. Lots of receivers are well coached, and lots of receivers can change direction laterally with the suddenness required to gain separation at a good rate. What's a bit more rare is Moore's ability to accelerate and decelerate, put his defender on the back foot with a well-timed burst of speed, but then a seamless transition to sink into a cozy pocket of space. The polish is really impressive, the lateral suddenness is really impressive, but the linear control stood out to me. His contested catch completion percentage has been quite low for the last couple of years, but this is why stats without context are just a guideline, because at least in the games I watched, I was really impressed by his ability to track the ball over his shoulder or hold onto the ball through contact in a busy area. But there are obviously different degrees to how contested a catch is, and I saw a number of occasions where it really is a case of just chucking the ball up and hoping more comes down with it. And I don't think that is his game, but I certainly feel you can depend on him to catch the ball through a bit of traffic. In terms of his NFL projection, I like his burst, but it's not blazing long speed. He's 6'3", and I've just spoken positively about the hands, but this isn't an AJ Brown or a George Pickens type of dominance at the catch point. So holding more to the standard that I've set for him, I should make it clear that I don't think he's a special talent who just breaks the defense with an elite physical trait. But what I think he is a supreme route runner with size and good hands, which should translate into a productive, high-volume target at the next level. At 2, I've got Ryan Coleman-Williams out of Alabama. Formerly known as Ryan Williams, now Ryan Coleman-Williams is a former 5-star recruit and will enter the league as a 20-year-old if he decides to leave college this year. His initial weight measurement as a freshman was 165 pounds, but his 6-foot frame gave him some room to grow, and he is now listed at 178 and is reportedly at around 182 pounds as of right now. Williams ran a 10.49 100-meter sprint in high school, and whilst I doubt it's as fast as that now that he's bulked up, the speed is still clear to see, and he is an exquisite route runner. The body control is outstanding. He can flip his hips and change direction with ease. He's in total control of his speed, as shown in the detailed manner in which he runs his routes. Williams' release off the line is incredibly deceiving for DBs, as he demonstrates the attention to detail combined with the ability to seemingly float and give no clues on where he's going before exploding one way or the other. And from there, every move is silky smooth, but also purposeful and elusive. The hands are a work in progress, but there is progress. As a freshman, he was a body catcher. Last season, he did start trying to catch it with his hands, and although he had 6 drops in his first 4 games trying to do so, he did only drop 3 for the remaining season, and he is tough catching through traffic. Everything else he does is phenomenal. He's not a true boundary receiver at the next level and will likely do a lot of his damage from the slot, but I feel the route running is going to make him one of the best in the NFL. At 1, I've got Cam Coleman out of Texas. Cam Coleman was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, second in his receiver class only to Jeremiah Smith, and despite remaining in the shadow of Smith in the eyes of consensus, I think he's the one with the truly elite talent and the potential of a genuine superstar. At 6'3", Coleman not only possesses X-receiver size, but has blazing speed. Hence why, after 2 years with Auburn, his transfer to Texas this offseason shouldn't shock anyone. In case you haven't noticed, Texas are quite into the explosive receiver thing, and this is a wise move for Coleman as well. He'll be asked to run a more extensive route tree than with Auburn, which should better demonstrate what he could be in the NFL. And what he could be is a practically unguardable route runner. The explosiveness combined with outstanding shiftiness and fluidity makes him someone who will separate consistently against NFL competition. And with some work, he could still take his game to another level, because he's a bit raw as a prospect overall. The routes are very sudden, very explosive, but it can be a bit untidy. It's not highly detailed and controlled like the receivers you see out of Ohio State. He hasn't nailed the intricacies. Like, for example, if you watch Jeremiah Smith run a slant route where you're sticking your hands out, pushing off against the defender, and then breaking inwards, he is absolutely maximizing the separation. Smith will wander up to the defender with an open body, fully extend his arms, and there's no tell on where he's going until the final moment, where he feels that defender on the back foot, and then it's a sudden break. Coleman isn't always fully extending, it's more of a lean than a push, he's already kind of curving in the direction of his eventual break. And this is just one specific move, but it's an example of the general attention to detail that is a little bit lacking in Coleman's game at this point in time. The other thing is the hands. On the bright side, Coleman isn't a body catcher. He does look to get his hands out and catch the ball away from his body regardless of the situation. The negative is that his technique in doing this is pretty awkward. Comparing him to Jeremiah Smith again, Smith is a natural, lets the ball come to him, throws his hands out, and plucks the ball out of the air like it's nothing. Coleman looks like he has to really concentrate on what he's doing. I've watched him in slow motion kind of change the angle of his hands, trying to figure it out as the ball is coming. And this lack of natural technique has led to some very disappointing drops. But I keep using Jeremiah Smith as the example of what Coleman should look to emulate. So why do I have Coleman ahead of him? Well, yes, he's a bit rough around the edges, but he'll be just 20 years old at the time of this coming draft. I think he can improve upon the catching technique and some of the route running refinement. Although to be clear, I'm not banking on him becoming a super detailed and nuanced route runner with natural hands. I don't think that's what he's going to be. What I'm seeing with Coleman is that the explosiveness and the snap to his route running is already enough to separate at a high enough level to be an elite receiver, which is probably why he hasn't felt the need to really work on the fine details in order to find those extra inches, as he's already in acres of space. His size and speed make him a major deep threat, but his ability to change direction will keep defenders from feeling like they can just sit off and save themselves from being burnt deep. And there's just not that many receivers in the NFL who can make even the best corners feel somewhat hopeless in that way. So a bit of refinement this year with Texas could unleash a limitless ceiling, but even as he is now, Coleman is a game breaker. So early thoughts on this receiver group based on these 13 that I've watched, absolutely stacked with talent. I hate the word generational because of its overuse and therefore misuse, and it's far too early to label this one generational now. But this could be one where you do look back and go, yes, this was actually the best receiver class of its generation. Could be, just throwing it out there. I would loosely bracket the top 5 as a tier because I don't think there's a huge drop-off between my number 5 Smith and my number 6 Marsh, but it was reasonably clear to me that it should be that way around. Whereas the top 5 was incredibly difficult to rank. And what's fun about this group, but also why I think I had so much difficulty when it came to ranking them, is that they're all very high-end prospects, but all of them for different reasons. And different teams value different things because they all run different offenses. They all have different philosophies. But just such an exciting top 5. And then you get to the Indiana guys and KJ Duff. I'm seeing them as wide receiver 1s or high-end wide receiver 2s at number 8. So it's obviously early. I often find receiver has a lot of late-round sleepers, so I'm sure there's still plenty of talent that I need to dig into and find through the year. But we also don't know who's going to get hurt, who's going to return to college. Regardless, it's going to be an exciting draft year for the receiver position. I know what you're thinking. Who's going to be covering these receivers? Well, good question. I'll be bringing you cornerbacks next. So if you did enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing as it greatly supports the channel. So I would really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.